and welcome to Novis, or welcome back if you've been here before. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Amanda, and I started this channel to talk about any and everything that can be considered strange. Before I get started, I just wanted to thank you all so much for all the support on the last video I put out. As of writing this script, I have 113 views and 18 subscribers. I know it doesn't sound like a lot compared to some of the super massive channels on this platform, but each and every view, like, comment, and subscription means the world to me, and I just wanted to make sure you all know that, so thank you very much. Please share this video with anyone you think would like it, and please leave me suggestions or requests for video topics in the comments section below or by filling out the form I've linked below. I'd love to know what you guys want to see. With that being said, let's get right into the video today. Warning: due to the graphic nature of the topics I will be discussing, some words and phrases will be censored. If you feel as though you may not be able to handle the discussion of topics such as murder, sexual assault, child abuse, or miscarriage, please click off of the video now. Viewer discretion is advised. I found this case while once again watching true crime clips on YouTube. This particular video was a short clip from Inside Edition, which I will link below if anybody's interested in watching. I was immediately fascinated for many reasons, but I don't want to give any spoilers, so we'll discuss more later. I hope you find this whole story just as interesting as I do. Really quick, these cases take place in Mexico, so I may pronounce some things wrong. I took Spanish in school, but that was almost 9 years ago now, so I'm trying my best. Please bear with me. Okay, let's get right into the video. Dating back to the time of the Aztecs, Mexico City has been a key part of every civilization in this region. Over the centuries, occupation of the city would vary from the Aztecs to Spaniards, and even to Americans during the Mexican-American War in 1846. This occupation and subsequent treaty is what added a vast territory to the United States, which today makes up New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, California, and portions of Utah and Wyoming. It wasn't until the 1920s that the stability we see today was established when the Partido Nacional Revolucionario Party, today called the PRI, took control of the city. Today, Mexico City, also known as Distrito Federal, or Federal District, is Mexico's largest city, the economic and cultural heart of the country, and has the largest population of any metropolitan city in the Western Hemisphere. However, by the late 90s, the city and Mexico as a whole was facing an epidemic of violence. For over a decade and a half, starting in the late 70s and early 80s, the economy in Mexico had slowly been decaying as real wages fell and the gap between the rich and the poor increased. On top of that, organized crime had become so rampant that some say an entire generation of police officers were corrupt, and they openly participated in crimes and protected other criminals. This led to an extremely weak justice system where most crimes were unreported, even less were actually investigated, and a tiny fraction of those would lead to a conviction. Those that were sent to prison faced deteriorating facilities, poorly trained and extremely underpaid guards, a lack of funding, and extreme overcrowding, sometimes containing 2 to 3 times the number of prisoners that a facility had been designed to house. It was during this increasingly violent and lawless time that a serial killer began their killing spree. In 1998, elderly female residents of Mexico City began being violently murdered. These cases happened very sporadically, and the police never connected the crimes to a single perpetrator. The press, however, was sure that the cases were connected and coined the serial killer as El Matafajitas, or the Little Old Lady Killer. On November 25, 2002, 64-year-old Maria de la Luz Gonzalez Anaya answered the door of her apartment after someone came knocking. Upon peeking out the crack, Maria was greeted by a tall, muscular figure with long hair. The stranger told Maria that they were a social worker from the local council and that they were there to help senior citizens fill out forms for financial aid. Maria invited the stranger into her apartment after the stranger briefly flashed what looked like a government ID. The next day, Maria's body would be found on the floor of her living room. She had been beaten and then strangled by the killer's bare hands. Police found that her home had been burglarized and all the killer had left behind was a few fingerprints. The press once again attributed this death to El Matafajitas, but just as before, the police refused to believe there was a serial killer in their city. The following year, the killings would continue and even increase in frequency. On March 2, 2003, 84-year-old Guillermina León Oropeza would be strangled in her home just like Maria 3 months earlier. In July, 84-year-old Maria Guadalupe Aguilar Cortina was found dead. Maria Guadalupe de la Vega Morales was found on October 9th, tied to a chair and strangled to death. Her arms had both been fractured. On October 24th, Maria del Carmen Munoz Cote de Galvin was strangled to death with a stethoscope. Less than 2 weeks later, Lucrecia Elsa Calvo Marroquin, 85, was strangled to death with the power cord from her own phone. 2 more women would die by the end of 2003. Besides the matching fingerprints that were found at some of the scenes, police were able to identify a few witnesses as well. They all described a tall, muscular figure with long hair who was dressed in a female nurse's uniform. Sketches of a possible suspect were drafted. One was distinctly masculine and the other with softer yet stern features. It would not be until the first few months of 2004 that Mexico City's Justice Department Chief, Bernardo Batiz, would finally confirm that El Matafajitas was in fact real. Hysteria gripped the news media, who had been claiming a serial killer was among them for years at this point. The public was outraged and demanded more be done to protect the grandmothers of Mexico City. However, all of this did little to slow El Matafajitas. 14 murders would occur during 2004. All elderly women who lived alone were tricked into opening their door by an unassuming-looking stranger and then strangled to death with various items either brought by the killer or found in their homes. As in the earlier cases, the homes were ransacked and little evidence of the killer was left behind. Police would note that these victims also experienced more violence than previous ones, including more beatings and, in some cases, sexual assault as well. By 2005, authorities were desperate to stop the killing. They began handing out pamphlets to the elderly in Mexico City and pleaded with them not to open their doors to strangers, especially in the evening. Not knowing where else to turn, authorities decided they needed a profile of the suspected killer. They looked to similar cases in other countries for ideas. By looking at other killers, such as Ted Bundy in America, the following profile was created. The police and the media believed that the killer was male, hence the masculine article L in El Matafajitas. Female serial killers are relatively rare, and they tend to kill in less physically demanding ways, such as poisoning, so police were confident in their belief that they were looking for a man. They also believed the killer was a man due to the signs of sexual assault at some of the murders. They believed that this person had a higher than average IQ, and they were obviously organized, as all the murders were seemingly well planned out and executed, leaving little evidence of the killer's identity behind. They also believed the killer was middle-aged, was likely abused as a child, and was clearly a full-blown psychopath. Because of this profile, as well as the witnesses' statements, police concluded that the suspect they were looking for was likely a man who dressed as a woman to gain the trust of unsuspecting elders. As any rational police force in the early 2000s would do, they arrested more than 40 trans women and sex workers who they believed fit the profile. All were fingerprinted and none matched their killer. Despite this, police continued to assume the killer had to be a man who was dressing as a woman to get into the victims' homes easier. As the summer of 2005 was ending, the killings started happening even more frequently. Police felt helpless as nothing they were doing seemed to be helping. And then, it all stopped. For a month or so, police held their breaths, just waiting for the killer to return. But when no more bodies surfaced, they began to wonder if their killer may have been picked up on other charges or potentially even died. They had the coroner fingerprint every dead body that came in so that they could rule out this theory. No matches ever came. This went on for 3 months. In the end, it would not be the police who would find the serial killer they had been looking for. On the morning of January 23, 2006, the luck of El Matafajitas would run out. Unlike the other victims, 86-year-old Ana Maria de los Reyes did not live alone. There was a second apartment in the back of her house that she had rented out to a young male tenant. Apparently, the killer did not realize this, as they chose Ana Maria as their next victim. As the male tenant exited his room and entered the shared part of the house, he saw what appeared to be a tall and muscular woman fleeing out the front door. He ran to check on his landlady, but she had already passed away after being strangled by a stethoscope the killer had found on her table. After realizing what he had just witnessed, the man ran out into the street after this strange woman and began yelling for police to help him catch her. Luckily for him, 2 officers were patrolling nearby and heard his screams. They were able to catch up to this mysterious woman and take her into custody. To everybody's surprise, the killer, who had been caught red-handed, was a 48-year-old single mother named Juana Barraza. Juana Dayanara Barraza Semperio was born on December 27, 1967, in Hidalgo, Mexico. This rural and mountainous region is located approximately 2 hours north of Mexico City and is named after the Mexican revolutionary leader, Father Miguel Hidalgo y Castilla. Juana was born to her father, Trinidad Barraza, a police officer, and her mother, Justa Semperio, a known prostitute. It is reported that when Juana was only 3 months old, Justa left her husband and began an adulterous relationship with a man named Refugio Semperio. Yes, you heard that right, they have the same last name. This is because Refugio is Justa's own stepfather. This man is who Juana would grow up with as a father figure. Specific information about her earlier life is hard to come by and difficult to verify. However, it's been reported that Juana's mother was severely alcoholic and extremely physically, mentally, and emotionally abusive to Juana throughout her childhood. Juana was said to be an extremely quiet and withdrawn child, even as a toddler. Some even say that Juana never spoke at all. It is well known that children who grow up in severely abusive or neglectful situations have a higher likelihood of developing a speech disorder, such as stuttering, slurred speech, delayed speech, baby talk, and even selective mutism, where the child chooses not to speak at all or in front of other people. Juana lived in stark poverty, never being taught to read or write. Later in life, Juana would confess that she used to see her mother sneak men into the house while her stepfather was away. Her mother would reportedly threaten to kill Juana if she told him. It was said that Justa would do absolutely anything for a drink, and when Juana was just 13 years old, this reportedly included trading her daughter to an older man named Jose Lugo for 3 beers. Apparently, Juana thought the exchange was a joke as it was so outlandish, so when they got back to Jose's home, she patiently waited for her mother or stepfather to come and take her back. However, no one ever came. Jose tied Juana to his bed and raped her over and over again. This man would keep Juana as his sex slave for the next 4 years, resulting in Juana conceiving and then miscarrying 2 of his children, first at 13 and then again at 16 years old. I want to add that there are other sources that claim the second pregnancy actually resulted in the live birth of a baby boy. However, the reporting is pretty split here and I'm not sure which is accurate. Either way, Juana's uncles finally found her and brought her home when she was 17. It is reported that Justa had been lying to the rest of the family this whole time and had told them that Juana had gone with Jose and was staying with him of her own free will. Justa would eventually die of cirrhosis of the liver due to her heavy alcohol use. Shortly after, Juana would leave her hometown behind and would move 2 hours south to Mexico City. Over the next decade and a half, Juana would experience several failed marriages and relationships, resulting in her having 4 children with 3 separate men. Juana would struggle to support her children alone, moving from one low-paying job to another. She did everything from street vending to touring central Mexico as a female luchador wrestler named La Dama del Silencio, or the Lady of Silence. Juana would later tell police she chose this name for her persona because she was quiet and kept to herself in her real life. After the birth of her 4th child, it became even more difficult for Juana to provide for her children. She was unable to make ends meet with her slew of part-time jobs, and she resorted to shoplifting from various stores. This eventually led Juana to burglarizing people's homes. During this time, Juana and a friend named Araceli Tapia Martinez would devise a clever plan for burglarizing more homes. The women decided to impersonate nurses to gain entry into elderly victims' homes, where they would then easily subdue their feeble targets and rob them. However, Juana's friend Araceli was in a relationship with a corrupt federal police officer, and the two would decide to extort Barraza. The corrupt officer would show up to the scene of one of Juana's robberies while it was in progress. As she was sneaking away, he would stop her and demand 12,000 pesos in return for not arresting her. Not long after, in 2000, Juana would have to retire from wrestling after a back injury. At this point in her career, Juana was earning 500 pesos per fight. Her retirement caused her financial situation to become even more grim. Although the killing of senior women had started in 1998, after 2000, when Juana had to retire, the murders became much more frequent, indicating that the murderer had more time to kill, more need for money which was stolen, or in Juana's case, both. Also around this time, Juana's oldest son would die in his early 20s from the injuries he received during a gang-related mugging. This may also explain the beginning or acceleration of the killings. I was only able to find this mentioned on the criminalminds.fandom page, which you can find in my sources in the description box, but according to them, in mid-2005, Juana began dating a taxi driver named Jose Francisco Torres, who quickly became her accomplice. This accomplice explains why the killings at the end of the summer of 2005 picked up so much. As far as I can tell, police never figured out why Juana took the 3-month break before her final murder in January of 2006. After her arrest, Juana immediately confessed to the murder that got her caught. At first, Juana told the police that she had killed other old women too, but she wasn't sure how many. Eventually, she would admit to 3 additional murders, but never any more. However, the El Matafajitas murders would stop as Juana sat behind bars. From 1998 to 2006, 49 grandmothers had been killed in cold blood. According to Juana, her first murder was Maria de la Cruz Gonzalez Anaya. She stated that while she was burglarizing the old woman's home, she said something to Juana that Juana considered to be derogatory. She was reminded of her mother in that moment, as had she still been alive, she would have been a similar age. Juana's rage took over, and as if she was finally getting revenge for all the abuse from her childhood, Juana strangled the life out of Maria with her bare hands. As you can imagine, the media circus reached an all-new level when they heard an almost 50-year-old single mother, who was a luchador wrestler by day, was also a cold-blooded granny killer by night. Police would reveal that when Juana was arrested, she was in possession of a government social worker's identification card, financial aid and pension forms, and other items to make her look like a social worker or nurse. When police searched Juana's home, they would find newspaper clippings about her crimes, trophies and items taken from the victims' homes, and shrines or altars to Jesus Malverde, a patron saint of narcos, and Santa Muerte, a folk Catholic Grim Reaper popular among death dealers. Both figures are commonly revered by criminals in Mexico. Police were once again desperate to prove to the media and the public that police had been on the right track the whole time. They even had Juana pose next to a plaster cast they had made based on eyewitness accounts to show how similar they looked. In reality, it was just dumb luck that allowed the police to stop this killer. It was revealed that Juana had actually been in a police station not long before her arrest. Even more incredibly, 1 week before her arrest, Juana had been featured on national television in Mexico to discuss her wrestling career. It seems no one, civilian or police, had suspected her at all. By the time Juana's case made it to trial in 2008, she would be charged with a staggering 30 murders, most of which Juana claimed she did not commit and that she was just a scapegoat the police were pinning the murders on. This also meant nearly 20 other murder investigations were still ongoing. During the trial, the prosecution would argue that Juana was a cold-blooded psychopath that had taken advantage of the kind and trusting nature of the abuelas or grandmothers of Mexico City. In the end, Juana's fingerprints would be found at 11 murder scenes, and she would be found guilty of 16 counts of murder and 12 counts of robbery. She was sentenced to 759 years in prison, the longest sentence in Mexico City history to this day. When Juana heard her sentence, she is reported as saying, "Let God forgive me and do not abandon me." She currently resides in a Mexican prison, and under Mexican law, she will be paroled in 2058, at the age of 101. The only explanation Juana has ever given for her crimes is as follows: "I hated the ladies because my mother mistreated me, beat me, always cursed me, and gave me to a big man." Symbolically, Juana got revenge on her mother by doing what she couldn't do to her as a child or young woman: strangle the life out of her over and over again. This is the part where I'm going to step away from the reported facts of the case and give my own opinion for a minute. I'm going to go on my soapbox for a moment, but this is a subject that I'm very passionate about and it's highly personal for me, so please consider listening, as anyone can be the solution to this problem for someone in need. I promise it will only take a moment. I want to make it very clear that I am in no way trying to justify or excuse what Juana did. Her crimes are horrendous, and based on the evidence I was able to find, I think she is right where she should be for the rest of her life. However, I want to discuss the psychological effects on a person from exposure to such adverse experiences as a developing child and young teen. Juana was severely abused by her mother, starting at a very young age, and this only ended with her mother eventually dying from a disease caused by her own self-mutilation, her drinking. She grew up in horrible poverty and had no solid attachment to anybody. Even the father figure she looked up to was her own stepfather and step-grandfather. Her mother sold her to a man for next to nothing, and she spent the next 4 years of her life being abused and raped by a stranger. All of these adverse events can be life-altering on their own, let alone all happening to the same person for nearly 2 decades. According to the CDC, adverse childhood experiences can be any potentially traumatic event, including abuse, violence, and neglect. It may also include any circumstances that undermine the child's sense of safety, stability, or bonding, such as substance use problems, struggles with mental health, and familial separation from divorce or imprisonment. Children growing up in poverty, like Juana, are much more likely to experience these events. Today in the United States, 61% of adults surveyed in 25 states have stated that they experienced at least one adverse event by the time they were 18 years old. 1 in 6 reported that they had experienced 4 or more adverse events. I'm sure you can imagine that growing up in a country where extreme poverty is rampant and lawless criminals control daily life, experiencing adverse events such as Juana did is extremely common. Living in these stressful conditions day in and day out can lead to changes in brain development, the child's immune system, and their stress response system, commonly known as fight or flight. In some cases, even the person's DNA, the most fundamental part of what and who we are, can show minute changes that can be severely detrimental to the child's development, leading to difficulty in attention, decision-making, and learning. These experiences have also been linked to higher rates of victimization later in life, higher rates of perpetrating crime later in life, and an increased risk of experiencing several mental and physical health conditions, including depression, suicide, heart disease, and chronic lung conditions. They also often struggle to form strong bonds and relationships with others, and may even be unable to experience certain emotions the way quote-unquote normal people do. If the person is already predisposed to committing crimes or dealing with mental illness due to biology, these events can trigger this behavior to occur. I like to think of it as some kind of light switch. Your biology is what created that switch, and then if you experience adverse things in your life, the switch may be turned on. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, if 61% of adults have experienced these events, why aren't they all murderers too? And that's a completely valid question. For example, I myself would be part of the 1 in 6 who experienced high rates of adverse childhood events. However, the biggest crime I've ever committed was speeding little on the highway. This is where prevention and recovery support make all the difference. Creating and maintaining safe, stable, and nurturing bonds and environments for children is paramount to reducing the frequency of adverse events. Furthermore, public education and skills training is key to building lifelong resilience among survivors. Just because the light switch was turned on doesn't mean we can't shut it back off. However, with adversity being so prevalent, it takes many people a lot of time and adequate resources to help everyone in need. Unfortunately, in both the US and Mexico, these things are not available for all, and many people fall through the cracks. This often leads to overflowing prisons and hospitals in the country. Mix all this in with the corrupt and essentially useless justice system in Mexico in the 90s and early 2000s, and it's not hard to see how a woman like Juana, who went through so much as a child and then remained unsupported as an adult, could resort to petty crimes just to make it through the week. I will leave a link to the CDC website on adverse childhood experiences below if anybody's interested in learning more. As it is so prevalent, I highly recommend everyone at least scroll through for a minute. I guarantee that if you haven't experienced this yourself, someone you know has, and you could be the person that turns this person's light switch off again and alters the course of their entire life. Once again, I want to just reiterate that I'm not trying to defend or excuse Juana's actions. They were absolutely awful, and she definitely deserves to be where she is for the rest of her life. However, again, I think it's very important to look at what might lead up to this so that we can try and prevent it in the future and save our own children from dealing with this. Now that we have established some base knowledge of how Juana may have been psychologically programmed as a result of her terrible childhood, I'd like to talk more about her specific motive to kill and her evolution during that time. As stated earlier, Juana originally began stealing and burglarizing as a way to provide for her family. She likely picked elderly women as they are the weakest target that would fulfill her desire for money and goods. Overpowering a man or a younger target would have likely been more difficult for Juana. Children are also pretty vulnerable, however, as they are just kids, they wouldn't have the money and belongings she was looking for. With that said, I find her jump from petty crime to murder very interesting. Women serial killers are generally pretty uncommon. Some studies suggest that they make up as little as 5 to 7% of all serial killings. The motive, method, and targets of female killers also vary greatly from their male counterparts. This does not mean that women will never kill in other ways, however, the differences are pretty stark overall according to current statistics. Male serial killers almost always kill for sexual pleasure and to gain control over another person. However, more than half of female serial killers are driven by financial means. This checks out for Juana on the surface, but remember, she was already stealing from her victims' homes without killing them. Murdering these women did not give her anything else financially. The financial motives of female killers discussed in the study I'm referencing are things like the desire for life insurance payouts or inheritance stated in the victim's will. Many times these women kill their partners after assuring they are the beneficiary and are commonly referred to as black widows. This category also includes women who kill their children in an attempt to secure partnership with a person that offers them something they feel they can't currently have, often both money and love. Juana, on the other hand, admitted to killing her first victim out of pure rage and a need for revenge. After her first kill, she continued to seek out victims that represented who she hated the most in a futile attempt to attain the control that she never had as a child. Juana likely found a sliver of control as she choked the life out of her victims. For once in her life, she wasn't the victim of this kind of violence. This leads me directly to the second aspect of the killings that I find striking, the method of killing. Once again, men and women vary greatly on how they generally commit their crimes. Men tend to use more physically demanding and potentially gruesome methods of killing, such as strangulation, blunt force trauma, or exsanguination by stabbing or shooting their victims. On the other hand, women more frequently use methods that leave little evidence and are less physically demanding, such as poisoning or asphyxiation via smothering. These women are usually the Black Widows discussed previously, or a so-called angel of death, a woman who murders those under her care, such as a nurse or a mother. Although there have been other female serial killers who have killed in predominantly quote-unquote male ways, such as Eileen Wuornos, who killed her victims by shooting them, Juana is still pretty unique. Although shooting is likely more gruesome than poisoning, it is still relatively impersonal. You can shoot someone from very far away, which allows the killer to distance themselves from their victims. Juana, on the other hand, strangled all of her victims, many of whom she killed with her bare hands. This is a very personal and physical way of killing. Oftentimes, the killer is mere inches from the victim, allowing the killer to look their victim directly in the eye as they viciously end their life. Juana also escalated throughout the years, eventually beating and even sexually assaulting her victims before strangling them to death. These are all methods rarely attributed to female killers. Finally, I want to touch on the targets of her crime. Juana not only killed for different reasons and killed in different ways than most female serial killers, she also killed different targets. As stated earlier, Black Widows and Angels of Death generally kill their spouses, their children, or their clients and patients. Since Juana had different motives than these women, her victims were all complete strangers to her. The only thing that made them targets was that they were all over 64 years old and reminded her of her mother. These women served as surrogates for Juana's mother. The most well-known example of this I can think of is the American serial killer Edmund Kemper, who was active during the 1960s and 70s. Ed despised his mother as she had been a domineering and abusive alcoholic during his childhood. Ed admitted that he sought out victims that reminded him of his mother in some way so that he could take out the anger he had towards her on someone he felt he could control. However, eventually this was not enough, and Ed's murder spree culminated in him murdering and mutilating his own mother. After finally ridding himself of his mother once and for all, Ed turned himself in. Ed killed his mother's best friend after killing his mother, but the motive for this murder was just to cover his tracks by making it look like they both left town. Her killing was not caused by his disdain for his mother. For Juana, however, this progression was never complete as her mother, the true source of her anger, was already dead. She kept killing and chasing the adrenaline of revenge, but could never attain true satisfaction. This likely only made her more angry, thus the evolution and escalation of her preferred method of murder. Overall, this case is very interesting to me purely as a glimpse into the workings of the mind of a kind of killer we haven't seen much before. Juana's story is a cautionary tale against childhood abuse and neglect. She shows us the extremes of what can happen when a person grows up in a turbulent, unpredictable, and unsupported environment, as well as what happens when those same children turn into adults who don't have access to financial stability or recovery. Obviously, Juana made the final decision to kill. However, each societal failing she experienced in her lifetime slowly pushed her closer and closer to the edge. She was never taught how to properly handle her emotions or recover from her trauma. She held it in and tried to legitimately work hard and care for her kids. However, with little opportunity, she turned to crime out of desperation. Unfortunately, this newfound willingness to commit legally and morally wrong acts, along with her pent-up rage, led to as many as 50 innocent women losing their lives. This case is just heartbreaking all around. I of course feel absolutely awful for the victims and all they went through. No one deserves to have their home and safety invaded by another who wishes to do them harm. I can't imagine what it was like to live in Mexico City for those 8 years, worried that every day you or your loved one may be the next target. I sincerely hope that wherever those women are now, they are at peace. I wish nothing but healing and light to those families and communities who lost such key members. In Latino culture, abuelas serve as the glue that holds the family and the broader community together. They should be treated with kindness and respect regardless of who they are biologically related to. On the other hand, I feel absolutely terrible for Juana and the millions of other children like her and I who grew up in chaos. I am extremely thankful that I was able to form secure bonds with the few people that I have, or who knows where I would be today. This is what drives my passion for helping those who drift alone through the world, and my interest in understanding how and why they came to be where they are today, so we can hopefully prevent future generations from facing the same fate. Although this all happened around 20 years ago and over 2,500 miles from my home in New York, I can't help but draw parallels to the society I live in today. Sure, we have made advancements in science and medicine, and maybe technology has helped us all connect on a level not previously possible, but things really haven't changed that much. Today, the United States has the highest poverty rate of any developed country by a long shot. A whopping 17.8% of the US population currently lives below the poverty line. This is a staggering amount when you compare it to the 25-country average of 10.7%, which includes developed countries such as Finland, France, Belgium, Sweden, Australia, and many more. Despite being the largest economy in the world, the wealth is largely held by a select few ultra-rich at the top. The wealthiest 1% of Americans hold roughly 16 times more wealth than the entire bottom 50% of Americans combined. This is largely due to policy failure and a false rhetoric over the last 50 years that if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you too can be wealthy. Although this is the case for a very small percentage, the truth is stagnant wages, inflation, and a lack of safety net in this country means that millions of families are living paycheck to paycheck and less than a week away from complete ruin should something happen to the breadwinners. If you follow this up with an addiction and mental illness crisis, a terrible medical system, a horrendously handled war on drugs, a racially biased judicial system, and a government full of corruption, you've essentially just described the environment in Mexico while Juana was growing up, and the environment that has allowed crime to flourish over the last 40 years. Potentially even worse, as at least the corrupt officials in Mexico City were openly corrupt, so people didn't trust or listen to them. Not to mention the 2.5-year global pandemic, which has only made all of the things I've just mentioned even worse. But that's a discussion for a different day. Overall, I think as a society, we need to take a good hard look at what is actually going on around us and make the changes we need to in order to protect our children and prevent them from growing up to be like Juana and the countless other criminals we hear and read about daily, who ruin not only their own lives, but the lives of as many people as they can take with them. And with that, we have once again reached the end of the story. This one was somewhat hard to research as many of the English sources had varying information, and finding Spanish articles that I could translate was a bit tough too. Once again, I will leave all of my sources linked down below in a document. I hope I touched on all the major parts of this case. If you know more or have any other thoughts or opinions, please let me know down below. I'm very interested in knowing what you have to say. Once again, I want to say thank you all for being here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. It really means so much to me. Thank you, and I will see you next time. And just remember, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.